So in this section we're going to be talking about planning, basic planning for a scene. And that's pretty big stuff. For me, honestly, that's one huge tip in animation. It's like, how do you get your work up onto the screen? And how do you make it look so good? People want to know that all the time. And the number one key principle for me is to plan my scenes, is to really have a clear idea of where I want to go with that scene before I even start.
The scenes that I have gotten through the quickest, the easiest, and that have turned out the best are invariably the scenes that I have done the most work planning ahead for.
Planning out my scenes and thumbnailing out my shots, it really gives me a sense that I'm exploring and I'm feeling more like an artist, because we are, as animators, we're artists. And it's important to feel that. If we're just pushing buttons, then we just become technicians. And it's important to really explore the art as it is, and to make sure that you feel like an artist inside, that you're pushing yourself, that you're really pushing your work. So planning might be seen as self-indulgent, but heck yeah, I mean, that's the kind of self-indulgence I want as an artist. I want to keep pushing myself to improve, to learn and get better, and to be inspired. I think that's a huge key factor in staying inspired and wanting to do this every day, is because you realize that there's so many different ways you could possibly do something. And when you challenge yourself as an artist and you say, you know what, I'm actually going to try my best to come up with something totally different and maybe entertaining, that's just exciting. That's the artist part of us as animators.
I'm a huge planner, huge. I mean, it's something that you have to know exactly what you're doing before you do it. I want to get into the shot so much that once I start doing that, I know my poses, I know my animation in my head, then I start thumbnailing it. And then I'll probably even start timing some of it, either with a stopwatch or in my head, and I'll do spacing charts, and I'll know exactly where my poses are, and I'll even do on an X sheet, I'll write down my poses, where they're going to be. So in my mind, I've animated the shot and I haven't even touched the computer. A lot of people, especially a lot of people starting out, don't understand that. As soon as they get a shot, man, they want to dig in on it and start messing with it and put in a pose, and it shows, I think.
In this class we're going to be going over 7 different planning methods. Visualization, your first idea, observation, thumbnailing, video reference, feedback, and finally what the director wants. It's important to know that you're not going to be using all these areas right off the bat in your animation, but it's a good idea for you guys to just start thinking about all the different ideas and different ways to plan a shot. So the first method that I'd like to talk about is visualization. Visualization is one of those methods that you can use no matter what. And a lot of times I hear people say that I don't have enough time to plan. I got to crank out 30 seconds of animation a week, which a lot of game animators have to do. But visualization is literally an amazing tool for you, and it doesn't take a lot of time to do. And ultimately what it means is closing your eyes. If you have dialogue in your shot, it's really easy. You just loop the dialogue and you listen to it over and over and over again. Close your eyes and you start to visualize what this character is going to be doing, the actions that they're going to be taking, the different acting choices that you could think about. And it's great because it doesn't take a lot of time. There's not a huge investment involved, but there's a big investment involved in that you're really trying to work out the performance in your head ahead of time. And so that's the first part of visualization. And then from there what you want to do is to kind of capture your thoughts on paper. And we'll talk about thumbnails a little bit later, but really what you want to do is to kind of capture the words, like he enters from this screen and he gestures with his right hand, and just kind of capture all that. And then from there what I do is I kind of close my eyes and I kind of play out the idea over and over, and I kind of start whittling that idea into one single performance that I can repeat over and over in my head, so I can kind of see it all play out. And that method for me is really huge. It doesn't take a lot of time. And I don't just usually use that method. I use some of the other methods that we'll be talking about in conjunction with it. But if you really practice this idea, it can be extremely powerful for you. With pantomime shots, it's great because you can really kind of explore all these different ideas. that your character can do. And one note that I really want to stress here that the mentors also want me to stress is that you guys got to keep it super simple. I mean, in the beginning, everybody wants to go nuts and to go do everything and put everything in their shot. So visualization, you start visualizing like, okay, character's going to come in and flip and do all this stuff, and you just got to kind of edit yourself and kind of cut a lot of those ideas out and really get a performance that's going to read clearly to the audience ultimately. So visualization is great because you can kind of write down your 1,000 ideas that you have and just start cutting them out, cut, and then close your eyes again and really play out that action in your head. The first idea is usually based on cliche or based on your gut instinct, which is kind of something that we like to trust in animation, but at the same time I still believe that exploring the opportunities that you might have in a scene by just kind of taking a few moments to see, is this the right thing? Is this the only thing to do? Well, what if I tried it this totally different way? And what would I get out of it if I tried it this different way? So let's take a moment to talk about instincts. Instincts are going to be your best friend as an animator. However, in the beginning, just like when you're doing something new, like say you're working out and you get, you're building muscles and stuff. In the beginning, those muscles are pretty flabby. And then you start working out after a while and they get stronger. And the way that you can kind of help that along is through like a personal trainer. And so it's the same thing is true in animation. Your personal trainer are your peers. So in the beginning, when you're coming up and you're doing this animation, you're thinking like, oh, this feels right. Trust that instinct, but double check that instinct by tapping into your peers, and they're going to kind of keep you in check. And then as time goes on, your instincts are going to evolve, and you're going to be able to just like really trust your instincts and go like, this is what I feel is right for the shot, and you'll be more confident in that. So in the beginning, understand that you might be a little uncertain about, is this the right idea or not, and really tap into your peers for that. And then as the time goes on, you'll get more comfortable with it, but I still encourage you, no matter how comfortable you get with your instincts, to always share that with your peers as well. Share your ideas, because it's just like another set of eyes on there, okay? So they will evolve. Take the time and understand that. And really do listen to what you feel is right for the shot, because ultimately that will be one of your best tools that you can use as an animator.
I take note of the first thing that comes to me. Like, if I get inspired by it, I'll be like, oh, it could be this! And I'll like, immediately like do a thumbnail. Or memorize what I'm doing. And this like, and then I put that aside. Like that was like my first impression. And then I'll my first inspiration. And then I'll put that aside. And then I'll keep thumbnailing out different ways to do it.
The stuff that I see at my work that stands out is stuff that people have taken a little bit of time to think about it a little bit more and take it to that next level. They didn't just go with their first gut instinct. Now, it's important to acknowledge that gut instinct, and maybe in the end you will go with that, but it's nice to just explore, because when I do that, I know that I find many more roads, many different avenues that I could go down. It can go a million different ways, and if I just take the first road, the first instinct that I have, I don't know, maybe I'm cheating myself. And when I explore and take that extra time, it does make me feel more like an artist, and it makes me feel more satisfied with my work in the end. I think it's really important to take a moment to define what cliché is. Wikipedia defines cliché as an idea that has been overused to the point of losing its intended force or novelty, especially when at some point in time it was considered distinctly forceful or novel. So basically, it's an idea that's been overused, and it's an idea that it worked at one point in time, but it might not work for today's context. And so one of the things that when I think about cliché, some of the biggest clichés that I see in animation is like hands on the hips. When the character's like just standing there, they put hands on the hips. I mean, Buzz Lightyear does that and it's great, but you see it so often, it's a little overdone. It doesn't really have much power anymore. Another one is pointing, when the character's like, hey, look at that. I think that's it's okay, but it is a little cliche. I mean, if it works and that's perfect for the shot, then great. And another one is like the characters scratching their head when they're thinking. It's so important to think beyond that stuff. Really, those are the big like cliches for me, and there's lots of other ones that, you know, like doing poses like this a lot and stuff, like I don't know, or poses like this out a lot, and we talk about those poses as well. I mean, it's just trying to think beyond what you typically see. You know, don't just copy other animation because it looks cool. There's a shot that I can use as a reference that was amazing and is absolutely amazing, but it's just been so overdone now that it's lost the impact. It's a shot that Ollie Johnston did on The Jungle Book, where Baloo's thinking and he kind of puts his hand up here and he's like, I don't know. And it's insane. It's amazing. He's trying to contemplate like what's going on with Mowgli. He's got to take him to the man village and all that part. It's just great, and you got to check out that shot for sure. At the time that shot was done, nothing had ever been done like that before, and it was so powerful, and people talked about that shot forever because it really took personality animation to a whole new level. It was something that was real. It wasn't just scratching the head. It was like something that was like, you know, this character was thinking a little bit more, and at that time it was so powerful. But I can't tell you how many times I've seen that done now in animation, and instantly when I see it, bam, it takes me out of the film and I think Jungle Book, and I see it. I've seen it so many times in a lot of Disney films as well, where they repeat that gesture. So it's just, I think about today, like what do people do today? What's current with our culture today? Like, culture has changed so much, right? I mean, if you look at what was going on when they did The Jungle Book versus today, I mean, come on. I mean, it's a whole different world, and the you know, it's tapping into that world. You know, if somebody's thinking, you know, even if there's no dialogue, you know, they might get more stressed out, like visually stressed, like, you know, these kinds of things that you can tap into that we can relate to. Whereas back in the day, you know, people would hold their stress in because it was bad to show it. Now it's like everything's open and outward and exposed. So it's like use ideas that work for today's standards and look at things. Like, I think Talk Soup is like amazing. It's like actually one of my favorite TV shows, and it's great because they pull out all the little snippets. You can find it on YouTube as well, of like things that are happening on TV, like the most ridiculous things, and you'll just find crazy ideas in there, gestures and weird things that it was like, wow, I would have never thought about that to animate, but it's stuff that's very current and very current in our culture. So it's just something that I want you guys to be aware of for wherever you are in the world and your different culture that you might be in, is to try to really tap into that and use ideas that are current, and don't just copy like what you've seen because it's cool because Pixar did it. You know, make your own animation and make it unique. Observation is one of those areas that just keeps me wanting to be an animator. It's really helped me to enjoy life on so many different levels and helped me to unlock so many hidden treasures in my mind for things and experiences that have happened to me in my life. It's one of those things that we take for granted, but once we start to unlock observation in our life as animators, it's what really makes me come to work every day, because I know that it's so exciting and there's so many potential ideas and things that I could put into my work, that observation unlocks those doors and the possibilities become endless.
Still definitely observe, and I think that you always have to be. You always have to be looking at stuff and slamming on the brakes. We don't want to get a ticket.
So I really think of observation as having two main areas. Firstly, it's all about learning how to unlock all those experiences from your past, your history, maybe special moments that happened to you when you were a little kid, little moments with that, dreams you may have had, just the way you saw the world, all the special ways that you maybe saw the world, all those feelings that you had inside, maybe the first time you laid eyes on, the first time you fell in love, that special person, and all those feelings is a really big source for us, for inspiration as animators. It's what really makes our work stand out and not feel like a textbook, that we're just following some rules. It's the thing that makes our work more special. The second part of observation is learning how to see the world around you as it exists now. you begin to actually see how things move. And you begin to see what actually motivates an action. Simple things like a footstep become so amazing because you begin to see how spectacular these things are. They were always spectacular, but now you can enjoy them, and you actually have a reason to want to open your eyes and take in everything that's happening around you. I remember when I was animating Boo on Monsters, and I would go out to dinner or whatever, I'd be with my wife or friends, and as soon as I heard a child's voice, my attention just immediately went to that direction, and I just became locked. No matter what the conversation was about, I just immediately was sucked into that. And I guess that's because at that time, that's what I was kind of focusing on, that's what I was animating. But in general, you just start to look at life and look at the things around you in such a new way, such a big, exciting way, because you really see, wow, this is stuff that I can eventually put into my work.
My wife actually gets annoyed at me sometimes. She thinks I have attention deficit disorder because we'll be out at dinner and we'll be talking, but I'm always my mind's always wandering to all these different things. And she's like, "What are you doing? What are you talking?" And I'm like, "I can't even tell you because it just sounds so stupid." And she's like, "Why? What are you doing?" I was like, "Well, this leaf was falling from a tree over there, and I just thought it was really interesting the way." And I was just kind of thinking about how the different forces were acting on it and how it was sort of it didn't obviously fall straight down. It kind of went like this, and I was trying to predict where it was going to land based on the stuff like this. And I was thinking about, gee, if I ever was going to, animate a leaf falling, I should remember this moment and blah, blah. And she's like, "All right, that's fine. You can stop talking now." It's just she's like, "Okay, I'm sorry I asked."
The most important thing is to be able to experience and observe life. It's all about life, what goes around away from the computer. The computer is merely just a tool. It's just like a pencil would be. To express yourself. So you got to look at it that way. It's one thing to master your tool, because then you can really get everything out of it. But to really make your work successful, that people have to be able to relate to it. And people relate to things that they experience in life.
It's the difference between good animation and bad animation. Little things like when you see a car stop and how it always goes, little things like that. And you or I'll watch count well, how many times does it when a car stops, how many times does it go back and forth and back and forth? Does it go, or does it just go, or does it go back 1, 2, 3? Sometimes I'll sit there, I'll be 1, 2, 3, little things like that. So it's just, and all that stuff, it sounds goofy, it sounds just like insane, but it's but you never know. It's just inspiration and education just comes in the most, in the strangest places.
So we really want to encourage you guys to keep sketchbooks. Sketchbooks are going to be something that you use throughout your career as an animator. It's going to be something that you can use and go back to. So you record all these ideas that you have, say you're in the park or you just have an idea, an inspiration that you have. Copy that down, write that down, and know that your sketchbook really is going to be this treasure trove that you can tap into. So keep sketchbooks, keep them close to you. Take them with you when you go on vacations, and utilize them as much as you possibly can. That's a way for us to get what's in our head onto paper so that we can better analyze it. So really that is just doing little drawings. These drawings don't have to be elaborate at all. These are really just for you. Thumbnailing is something that I do on every scene. It's something that really helps me out a lot. That is the most fundamental tool for me, and it doesn't take a lot of time to do that, and it helps me explore things quickly and see what I might be able to do.
For me, the easiest way to do that is to do it ahead of time, to plan that out before I'm in the computer, before I'm saving keys, before I've got spaghetti of splines everywhere in my curve editor. It's a lot easier to just get in there and do some really rough thumbnails. I'm a crap artist, so I do all my thumbnails with little stick guys pretty much. That just has a ball so I can see the hips, has a line so I can see where the shoulders are, and as long as I can see the angle of the hips, angle of the shoulders, angle of the head, and then the limbs, that's all I really need for 98% of my scenes when I'm doing the planning.
It helps to me to know, okay, I want the ball to start here, and it's gonna follow this path, it's gonna make this contact, and then it's gonna get out of a screen this way, And then I try to figure out of what the action might be. So for example, I'll be like, yeah, around here, maybe the ball is going to stretch. And here there's going to be like a big stretch that, and then we see the whole change of shape, of volume, and then boom, it starts, to go that way. Sometimes I write little notes, and that's just, people just work differently. To me, this is really helped to me to write little notes. So here, maybe I'll write down, like, change of volume, maybe over 2, maybe 3 frames. Maybe the whole thing might not look like this, but at least it helps me to get started.
So video reference can really help you study movement frame by frame. And there's 2 main types of video reference. The first main type of video reference is the type of you filming yourself, doing the action or the acting that you're doing. And the other type of video reference is found footage, that which you might find in a DVD or on the internet. And so it's important to know that you can really tap into these different things, especially when your character does a move that you might not be able to do, like a backflip or like a triple backflip, which you might be able to do, but I certainly can't, and a lot of people can't. So you can really use found footage for a lot of stuff as well. So maybe you're thinking, video reference for a ball? Yeah, I mean, why not? There's things happening here that as beginning animators you might not be aware of, and that's what we're going to be teaching you. When I look at this reference, I definitely see things happening that helps me to break down the movement. Video reference totally helps break down movement, especially if it's not on a human character, because that really is your way to say, okay, that's how this moves, and it allows you to kind of study it and get into it a little better.
I think video reference is one of our biggest and often most underused, tools that has a ton of potential to help us with our scenes. But if you just copy it, frame for frame, you're definitely going to lose something in the translation. What you should be doing is videotaping yourself and then adding in the principles of animation and layering, some overlap and exaggeration and things like that onto the performance.
Like Nightmare Before Christmas. As my wife will tell you, I'm not quite the dancer. So what do? You rent Gene Kelly. You get the best. Fred Astaire. Looked at a lot of reference there. And just, you learn from the best by watching. It's not to say you rotoscope. I mean, that's where people, I think, fall off the wagon. But to take it and take what you want out of it and get the essence and put it into your animation, that's what it's about, because that's going to broaden you as an actor. We have that, I could be George C. Scott, I could be Jack Nicholson, I could be anybody, Meryl Streep, How many actors can have the range that we have the capability as animators to be? You can, because you can pull in all this reference and use it towards any of the characters on a given film.
So here's some examples of some video reference that we've filmed as animators through the years of different scenes that we've worked on. It's pretty much, we do this stuff. We really are getting up there, kind of making fools of ourselves, if you will, to just kind of get insight into how we might approach a scene. And we might act these out, like we said, just tons of times. And eventually we'll grab people and put them in the mix and see what we get. And it's just a really important part of the process, and it really gives you so much information right off the bat that you can potentially use in your scenes.
You tend to act stuff out in a closed little room, and you're observing yourself. That's what I'm saying with a baseball. You get up off your butt and act it out. You're observing your body.
Yeah, that seems to be the best way for me to solve an animation problem. If something's just not feeling right and I just can't get it, then I'll just get up in front of the mirror and start moving around, or even without the mirror sometimes. Because sometimes for me, I almost feel like I learn more sometimes with like my eyes closed, by just feeling, because you can feel which muscles are tensing in your body, and that tells you where your center of gravity is and where the forces are coming from and things like that. And so, but a lot of times I'll step in the mirror, I'll just go in the mirror and I'll just go, take a move, and I go, oh, duh, yeah, I'm moving the wrong foot first,
Feedback is one of the most important things in animation. If you want your stuff to excel and get better quicker, the best way to do that is to get input and feedback from other animators, and that's kind of why it's important to post your stuff on Animation Mentor for students to see it, for mentors to see it, and to critique your work. It's important for you to communicate clearly, and especially in the beginning, you don't really know what that is yet. I mean, we're trying to help you cultivate that in yourselves and to help foster that and bring that to life, but feedback will really help tune your eyes and tune and train your thinking, and will definitely make your animation much, much, much better.
And it doesn't matter who. It doesn't have to be a certain type of animator. It's just you need to get feedback and you need to get reaction. Maybe it doesn't even have to be an animator. It could be a family member or your friend, and you say, hey, what do you think of this? And just look at it and see if they read it, you know. Because in the end, that's all that counts, is how the audience reacts to it.
You get really attached to the poses you put down, and you're like, yeah, that's what I'm doing. And even when a director or supervisor or a peer comes over and says, you know, you're so attached to it that your ego is so involved with it that you don't want to change it because you feel like, you know, I spend the time to come up with this, it must be good. You have a hard time stepping away and saying, is this really good? Or is it really the best pose? Is there a better way? Is it too am I doing it because it's the coolest pose or it works the best for this shot?
You have to be prepared to show your work in its rawest form. Right now you're used to spicing up as much as you can before you show it to somebody. But you can start showing people your work even when you're too embarrassed to show it. You know, you want to get your comments from people as soon as possible. I can't stress enough that other people's eyes will have a clearer understanding of what's going on than your own, because you'll be staring at your work for so long that you might think it's perfect, but if you have another set of eyes, and in a room as Dailies is you're gonna be sitting in a room with 20 to 30 other animators, you're gonna have 20 to 30 other sets of eyes looking at your work, and they're not looking at it again to smash your ego, they're looking at it to make the shot look great.
Here's a couple of quick tips on getting feedback. Remember to listen to your mentor first. Look for repeat comments in your workspace and take those into consideration. Feedback is never a personal attack on your work. It's always meant to improve your work. And that's kind of one of the biggest things, especially for me in the beginning. It took me so long to kind of get that one. But once you can kind of put aside your feelings, you know, you can really take in and listen to what people are actually saying. And almost always the ideas that people give you are pretty fantastic. So here's some important tips on giving feedback. Always start with a positive comment. Maybe that's cliche, but it works very well. Like, hey, I really like the ball bounce. You know, it hangs at the top really, really nice. You got that timing really good. You know, and one thing I see is that when it's falling down, you might want to increase the speed or the spacing there as it's dropping. It's just a nice way to kind of lighten the blow, you know, because there's like lots of things that you want to suggest to somebody, and it's always important to kind of pick out certain things that you like first, because it makes it a little easier, especially when you're in class 1, 2, and even class 3. It's just easing you into that, and also building your muscle, because when you work in the studio, that's the kind of feedback you want to get, and the type of feedback you should be giving your peers. Always point out what you think is working, and then kind of move into suggestions. It works great. The second thing is to never be rude in your feedback. It's important to know that the industry is really small, and somebody who's rude in their feedback, like, oh, that sucks, I would never do that, oh, I would do something better, which does happen sometimes. Those are the people who are usually the first to go from the company because they're not really working well with the team. So it's just important to kind of keep yourself in check. If you're a very strong personality, you might want to take this comment into consideration, is to really to think about how you say things, and to always try to start with a positive. That works so well. And finally, the last tip I could give you on giving feedback is to give it, okay? Don't hide, don't be too shy. I know it's difficult to give feedback, but the more you give it, the more you're refining your eye, the more you're able to see things better, even in your own work. So I encourage you, we're always talking about going and posting comments on people's workspaces. This is the same thing. It's an important part of your evolution as an animator. So do it as often as you possibly can to help refine your skills. When you start working as a professional animator, there's one extra step in the process, and that is what the director wants. That's pretty much the most important part of the process, but we put it last because right now you guys are students and you guys are the directors, so you are in charge of the vision. That's your job, so run with it and have fun with that. But once you become a professional animator, it's your job to ask as many questions as you have about that scene, to get as much information that you can from the director, to have them kind of download their information that's in their head into yours, so that you have a clear vision of what they want, so that when you start planning out your scene, you have a basic knowledge of the scene and what the director wants. It's going to be that much easier for you to kind of key into what needs to happen for that scene. When you take all the information that you've gotten so far and you put that all together into the scene, that's what we call blocking out your scene. It's taking the ideas that you've come up with and now putting them down on the computer or down on paper, so that when people can flip these images or they can see the movie file, they can get a really clear idea of what you want to communicate to them. It doesn't need to be polished. It doesn't need to have all sorts of information. To me, blocking is putting the least amount of information I possibly can up onto the screen to communicate my ideas clearly, so that people can look at it and say, oh, okay, I know what you're going for here. You know, oh, that's really funny. Oh, this could be stronger. As soon as you do that, that's kind of communicating your ideas, and that's what we call blocking. So the three methods that we're going to be taking a look at are layering, pose to pose, and straight ahead animation. Layering in animation is breaking a movement down to its essential parts and just kind of starting out with just a basic movement and then layering more controls on top of that. For instance, animating a bouncing ball makes more sense for me to animate it in a layered fashion, because I can think of that movement in terms of overall spatial placement as opposed to thinking about it in terms of key drawings or key poses. With this method, you primarily work with the curve editor, adding as few keys as possible and changing those few keys to get the timing and placement you want and building the performance out of that.
The layering technique is when you hide the limbs and you just have the body and the head, and it's a simple bouncing ball. I only use it if, A, the storyboards are really clear and the director is really clear what he wants, and I know I'm not going to be going back and forth as to what the performance is. The only thing that I really need to be focusing in on is making that physicality believable. I'll also use a layering technique if I have to do a naturalistic kind of animation, when I was doing special effects and stuff like that, because to do natural motion, I find this, for me, is the best way to figure that out. I can do stylized animation, this technique too, but for the naturalistic kind of animation, I find, for me, this is the only way I can work.
Layering in animation can really let you get a performance in there quickly. If you do choose to do a layered animation, it's still utmost importance to have a clear vision and a clear plan of attack on how you're going to layer that performance into the computer. The general tendency with this method is to just jump in and to start moving things around and not having a clear idea. And this can lead to watered down performances rather quickly.
Pose to pose is basically create one pose and another pose, and then you create a breakdown, and then going between those poses is what you get.
This method was born as a traditional animation technique and was thought for a really long time to be too difficult to do on the computer. This has really changed in the last few years, and it really gives us 3D animators a chance to think about our work in terms of drawings, just like a traditional animator would. And from my experience, it's really helped push the work forward in huge leaps. When I'm working in this method on the computer, I like to treat every frame that I'm animating on like a drawing. So I'll set a key on every animatable control for that character, which pretty much locks down that image or that yeah, that image is a drawing, and then I can change it later if I want to, but at least I know if I go forward in time and make changes, it's not going to change the drawing that I've already created.
The reason why I choose to follow a more traditional route and path is A, because I was trained in the traditional method, so I am a traditional animator at heart, and I find it easier to break down motion, emotion, animation into simple images, into strong posing, concentrate on each key as an image or a drawing. And that's how I sometimes refer to keys as drawings, because in my mind that's what I'm doing. I'm moving images on a drawing to drawing basis and adjusting my animation in drawings. And again, that's more of the traditional background and thinking that goes behind my approach to animation.
This method, I've really found it helpful to work with step keys, because that allows us to treat it as drawings, and it doesn't give us any artificial in-between movement, because the computer likes to just give us movement for free, and that movement generally tends to be wrong. So it's important to not have that information in there and just have what you truly want to show and represent as your ideas for the shot, just through images that pop through, as opposed to having in-between motion. With this method, you definitely don't think too much about the curves at all, actually. You just think about the images and the drawings that you're trying to represent to communicate your ideas clearly. I personally love this method because it lets me focus on the key drawings, the key storytelling poses that I want to communicate to the audience. And then once I have that, then I can go ahead and add the breakdowns and in-betweens that I need to build the exact performance that I want to communicate. The tendency with layered animation is to forget to put things, and really important things, into the performance, like a twist or a bend in the body. And what happens is you get too far and it becomes really complicated to make those changes later. And with pose-to-pose animation, you have the tendency or the want and desire to put that twist and action into the pose immediately. So the performance usually wind up looking much more dynamic and much more clear, as opposed to layered animation feels somewhat stiff sometimes, because adding that motion again, it just becomes a huge pain. Pose-to-pose animation is really, it's a great way of working, and it's kind of bringing traditional animation into computer animation. And when I say that, it's treating each pose as a drawing, which we talked about already, but really it's working that method and kind of using the step keys so that it just pops from one pose that you're putting into the computer to the next. So really you're only seeing the information that you're putting in. And that's really cool, because it's really like you're working as if you're working on a drawing, and then you have another drawing that's maybe like 10 frames later or whatever. And it's a great way to work because it takes out all the computer calculations. It doesn't put any real in-betweens in there, because that's been a lot of the problem in the past with computer animation and having it be floaty, is that the computer does a little bit too much of the work for you. So it fills in the gaps, basically. So if you now take that stepped tangent and put it on spline, it's going to start interpolating in between the two poses and giving you some movement that might not be exactly what you want. So when you're working in pose-to-pose, you're putting in the specific information exactly as you want it. So you put your key pose, which might be like this, and then another key pose, which might be like this, and then you can go in between and put your breakdown, which might be like that. So you get something that kind of looks like that. And without the computer doing too much work, you just have those three poses. You can get that you kind of get it popping, and you can kind of just see the movement and how it's working without the computer giving you any information. So it really makes you work like a traditional animator. And I think that method honestly is extremely powerful, because you're very conscious about exactly what's happening with your character, how the arcs are flowing, what's dragging, what's lagging, what's overlapping, and it's a way of working that has been extremely powerful, and it's a method that we really encourage you guys to practice and try out at Animation Mentor. My general tendency with this in the beginning was to want to see every drawing as opposed to conceiving the overall flow of the movement. So in the beginning, my timing was totally off, because I wanted to see every drawing that I spent time posing out. But the thing is, no, you don't want to. Sometimes you just want to feel the movement. You don't necessarily need to labor on that pose unless it's a hold or something. But in the beginning, you know, I found it really difficult, and it took some time to figure out the timing and how the timing works. And generally, my timing was off. It was much slower because I was holding each drawing as opposed to kind of moving in and out of the movement. And that just comes with experience and time. In the beginning, this method is kind of overwhelming to clean up. Why? Because you have a key on every single animatable object, and when you move around and start moving things around in the curve editor, it can become overwhelming really quickly. But if you just take time and patience to practice with this method, it winds up being extremely powerful. And this method takes a little bit longer to block out because you have to be 100% clear with your ideas. You can't really mess around, and that's the thing about this method that I like, is because it makes me think more before I start, and I'm kind of trapped into that mode of you gotta have a solid idea and a clear performance, because when you present your ideas, there's no hiding behind the computer or any free motion. It's all just 100% your ideas right there on the screen.
Straight ahead is kind of just going from frame 1 to frame 2 to frame 3, and you're basically kind of feeling your way through your animation. You're basically making it feel right. It's kind of getting the best of both worlds. You're getting the advantage of pose to pose, which is very high clarity, really good silhouette, really good timing, but in the same sense, you're not sacrificing that kind of really nice organic feel you can get in animation.
So for things like tails, big floppy ears, cloth, hair, antennas, all this stuff I would animate, unless I'm using it for some kind of expression, I would animate that straight ahead after I had pretty much locked down the main body performance. So the cool thing about all these different blocking methods that we're talking about is that you can use them in conjunction together. So for instance, if I was going to be animating Taylor, which is the ball with the tail, if I'm going to be doing that animation, I use a couple of different techniques. First of all, I'd animate the ball bounce first using a layered technique. So I'd kind of like get the up and down working, and then I'd kind of like add in the arc, and I kind of adjust the tangents and really get the bouncing ball working first. And to me, that's using the layer method. So I'm kind of layering different controls on top of each other, maybe adding then, after I get that arc really nice, I can then add the squash and stretch and get that all in there. And once I get that defined, then I can use straight ahead method. So straight ahead is then I can turn the tail on, boonk, right? So I'm hiding the tail in the beginning, I'm just working on the ball. And then now I'm going to show the tail and use straight ahead, because what's going to happen is the primary force that generates the secondary action of the tail is the ball. So the ball moves, and everything that happens on that tail is subjected to what happens with the ball. So once I do that, I can literally go almost just step by step, and I see the ball moving upwards. I know when it moves upwards, the tail is going to drag down and come up as it starts to fall. And we'll be talking a lot about overlapping action. I just kind of wanted to introduce this idea to you guys that you can kind of combine different methods and really work out certain sections of your animation first, using layered or using pose to pose, maybe hiding arms when you get to characters that have arms, and then adding the arms later, so you can just really get that movement down really well, and then you can add the arms later. So it's like combining these different methods, pose to pose, layering, and straight ahead animation. Straight ahead animation isn't just good for things like tails and hair and ears and extremities. It's also, the power of that method lies in the spontaneity that it can give a performance. Once you have your main key poses down and you have those locked down as drawings, either on a drawing board or in the computer, your whole performance is pretty much there in a pose to pose method. And then you can sometimes, and I find this really powerful for straight ahead animation, is to then literally just work through the performance, maybe little bit by little bit, and straight ahead animate then from after you have a key pose and then maybe a breakdown and another key pose, that you just kind of literally move to those keys and start adding in the in-between motion straight ahead. And sometimes the power of that method can give such a nice live quality and spontaneity to the performance that I don't think could be done if you just animated it layered or just pose to pose. It's the combination sometimes of the methods that work best.
Like my form of working is I will block something in a pose-to-pose manner to get approvals but a lot of times I like to leave it, even though I've blocked it in pose to pose, I go through it in a straight ahead fashion, wiping through those poses. I might not use every one, or I might alter it significantly because of the straight ahead thing. So I can never seem to do anything purely on straight ahead or purely on pose to pose.
You get a natural flow in and out of the movement. To me, I find animation to be extremely spontaneous because when I work, I plan out my shots so I conceive the overall motion in broad strokes, the general basic storytelling drawings and breakdowns and extremes. But it's with the method of straight ahead animation that makes the animation feel spontaneous when I go to animate it and start refining the movement, and I start making decisions right there on the fly because I know the overall performance is there. But once I start going into it straight ahead, I'm like, oh, well, maybe the hand could drag a little bit more here, or maybe the ball could squash a little bit more on the ground. And those kinds of things really help me to make my performance seem spontaneous as opposed to labored. And it took a week. Although it might take a week to do, I'm trying to constantly make spontaneous decisions, and straight ahead animation helps keep that animation fresh and spontaneous looking. In CG, I don't think I would ever want to animate a scene completely 100% straight ahead because I think it could get overwhelming and pretty out of control pretty quick. So before I start a shot, as part of my planning, I like to know which method or methods I'll be using when I'm animating a shot. And almost always it's a combination of the methods. Maybe it's a combination of all three or just a couple. But I like to know that before I start because it'll help me to get my performance in there, hopefully a little clearer and a little quicker. So you really have to ask yourself, does this action feel like a posed-based action, or does this feel like a layered-based action? And sometimes it's a little bit of a combination of both. And through the years, I think that's what most of the animators that I know have found to work best for them, is really just finding a combination of the methods before they start, and then utilizing those different methods to get a better, clearer, and quicker performance. So in the end, it comes down to practice and just plain old trial and error. But in time, each one of you is going to find the method or methods that work best for you. So just get out there and start experimenting.
And I usually just space it out where like things will hold and then transition into another hold and then transition into another hold. And even if it can look like in my mind, I've already kind of figured out, what it's going to look like when it's done. Because that's like the biggest thing in CG for me, was learning like foresight. I was so frustrated at first, like I knew what I wanted it to look like, but there was always like with the holes and the in-betweens and not all the avars are in there at first. I was so frustrated, like, it doesn't look like what I want it to look like. When, I'm first doing blocking, but I've learned after doing so many shots that it does eventually just kind of like you gain the ability to look at your blocking where it's like, and know that, oh yeah, that's going to work, because when you get like 2 days later, it'll be like.
Yeah, keep it simple, keep it clear. What does that mean exactly? Well, what that means is if your scene has too many poses, too many drawings, too much stuff going on, then it's not simple. And in the beginning, you want to put so much stuff into your animation that you forget this super important fundamental rule of keeping it simple. And there's an old saying, keep it simple, stupid, KISS. I still go back to this principle and I try my best to simplify my scenes. A lot of times still I get criticism that I'm trying to put too much stuff into my scenes. And it's important to get that feedback again from people and to make sure that it's reading clearly and communicating. If it's doing that, then your scene is good. And that's why it's important to trust what you're going to do in the end, because it's going to be up there for people to see, and it's got to represent something that you feel is what you want to communicate to the audience. All right. right, so you guys hung in there. You're here. You're all the way at the end of the class, and I just wanted to say there's so much information in this class, and I know a lot of it is going to like go over your heads, and a lot of it might stick. And this class should serve as a baseline for you as animators, because it's really the core of what animation is. Like the planning, the 7 planning methods. That's basically how you come up with the magic, right? How you come up with your ideas, and then the blocking methods are how you take those ideas and put them into the computer. So all that information, that's a lot of stuff to take in. So I really want you guys to make sure to take as many notes as you possibly can, and to also refer back to them, okay? Because there is so much. There's 7 planning methods. Are you going to use all 7 planning methods every single time you do a shot? Absolutely not. But you might use 2 or 3. That's very common. You might want to experiment with different ones depending on the shot and the complexity of it. So use these different techniques and see what works for you. No one way of working in animation works for everyone. It just doesn't work that way. And so kind of experiment with each shot, if you can, with some different techniques, especially when you go into the blocking stage, because then you can start experimenting with layering and pose-to-pose and straight ahead and seeing what works for you. There's so many different techniques, but this class really kind of just shows you all the available techniques that you can use in your animation. So we really hope this serves as a foundation for you guys, and is something that you'll look back on as you try different shots and different techniques when you get into the acting and all that, and really helps you guys push your work to the next level. Now I wish you guys the best of luck in implementing these ideas into your work, and I'm super looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with in it. So I hope you enjoyed and have tons of fun. Adios.